I'm going to tell you something that will make you uncomfortable. Stop buying bonds in 2026. If you're over 50 with retirement savings in traditional 60-40 portfolios, you're positioned exactly wrong for what's about to happen. I've spent 40 years studying debt cycles. I managed through the 1970s inflation crisis, predicted the 2008 collapse, and called the 2020 monetary explosion before it happened. What I'm seeing right now is the convergence of forces that appear maybe twice per century, and when these forces align, they don't just create market corrections, they create generational wealth transfers. The machine that's been working since 1945 is breaking down. And the people who don't see it coming will spend their retirement years watching their purchasing power evaporate while their account statements show numbers that look fine. This isn't about missing gains. This is about protecting everything you've worked for from a systematic transfer that's already begun. Here's what nobody's telling you. The United States government owes $38 trillion in debt. That's $285,000 per taxpayer. Interest payments alone now exceed defense spending for the first time in American history. We're paying $2 trillion annually just on interest, and that number doubles within 5 years as old, cheap debt rolls over at higher rates. Think about that. We're spending more money servicing past promises than we spend protecting the country. And here's the mechanism nobody explains. When debt becomes unpayable, governments have only three options: default explicitly and destroy the currency's credibility. Nobody chooses this. Restructure through dramatic austerity, cutting benefits and services, politically impossible when voters remove anyone who tries, or inflate it away, printing money until the nominal debt gets repaid with dollars worth far less than the dollars originally borrowed. They always choose option three, always. Because inflation spreads the pain so broadly that voters can't identify the source clearly enough to punish politicians. They blame corporations for raising prices, foreigners for currency problems, or markets for volatility. They never connect it to monetary policy because the mechanism is deliberately obscured. I managed money through the last time this happened. From 1971, when Nixon closed the gold window, until 1982, we experienced the exact same setup. Unpayable obligations, political gridlock, demographic pressure, and a Federal Reserve choosing inflation over system collapse. Let me tell you about David, real person, not a hypothetical. In 1971, David was 45 years old with $230,000 in retirement savings. Significant wealth at that time, equivalent to roughly $8 million today. His financial advisor, a respected professional at a major firm, told him what every advisor says when clients approach retirement: reduce risk, increase bonds, protect capital. David followed this advice precisely. By 1975, he had 75% in treasury bonds and high-grade corporate bonds earning 7-8% interest, with 25% in conservative blue-chip stocks. The account statements looked wonderful, numbers growing every quarter from interest payments. Meanwhile, his neighbor Maria, an immigrant who'd experienced currency devaluation in her home country, kept only 20% in bonds, with 30% in stocks, 25% in real estate investment trusts, 15% in commodities, and 10% in physical gold. Her portfolio fluctuated wildly. She experienced drawdowns that kept her up at night. By 1982, 11 years later, David's $230,000 had grown to $445,000 from compound interest. He'd nearly doubled his money on paper, but here's what the statements didn't show. Inflation over those 11 years totaled 146%. His $445,000 had the purchasing power of $181,000 in 1971 dollars. He'd lost 21% of his real wealth while earning interest every single year. David couldn't retire at 55 as planned. He worked until 68. And when I last saw him at 70, he was still working part-time at Home Depot, wearing a name tag, helping customers find plumbing supplies. Not because he loved the work, because his retirement savings hadn't kept pace with his cost of living. Maria's portfolio, despite the volatility and the sleepless nights, had grown to $1, 26 million by 1982. After the same 146% inflation adjustment, her purchasing power stood at $512,000 in 1971 dollars. She'd more than doubled her real wealth. She retired at 58 and traveled. Same starting point, same time period. The only difference was understanding that during debt cycle resolutions, the rules change completely. Here's the framework you need to understand. The economy operates like a machine with 3 gears that interact. The first gear is productivity, how much value we create per hour of work. This grows slowly and steadily, maybe 1-2% per year in developed economies. The second gear is the short-term debt cycle, the normal business cycle lasting 5 to 10 years where we borrow during expansions, contract during recessions, and central banks adjust interest rates to smooth things out. The third gear is the long-term debt cycle, the 75-100-year pattern where debt accumulates to levels that can't be serviced from productive capacity, forcing a complete reset. Right now, all 3 gears are misaligned. Productivity is stagnant at 4% annual growth. The short-term debt cycle can't function normally because interest rates can't rise enough to control inflation without triggering financial crisis. And the long-term debt cycle has reached the point where each new dollar of debt produces only 15 cents of real GDP growth, down from 60 cents in the 1960s. When these gears jam against each other, the machine doesn't just slow down, it breaks. And the braking process creates violent wealth transfers. Let me make this concrete for you right now. If you're 58 years old with $800,000 in retirement savings, currently allocated 55% bonds and 45% stocks because you've been told to de-risk as retirement approaches, here's what's about to happen to you over the next 5 years. Your $440,000 in bonds, mostly investment-grade corporates and government bonds earning 4 to 5%, will return approximately $110,000 in interest over 5 years. Sounds good, but if inflation averages just 6% annually, which is actually below what we experienced in 2021-2023, your purchasing power on that $440,000 principal erodes to $328,000 in today's dollars. You made $110,000 in interest but lost $112,000 in purchasing power. You worked backwards. Meanwhile, your $360,000 in stocks, representing ownership in businesses that can raise prices with inflation, returns 9% annually in this environment, growing to $554,000. After inflation adjustment, purchasing power stands at $414,000 in today's dollars. You gained $54,000 in real terms from the 45% of your portfolio in stocks, while losing $2,000 in real terms from the 55% in bonds. Your total portfolio grew from $800,000 to $994,000 nominally, but purchasing power stands at only $742,000 in today's dollars. You lost $58,000 in purchasing power over 5 years despite your account balance growing $194,000. This is financial repression. This is how governments inflate away debt. And this is what's already happening to you right now if you're positioned conventionally. The window for repositioning is closing faster than most people realize. Here's why 2026 specifically matters. We have a $9 trillion refinancing wall hitting between now and 2027. Government debt that was borrowed at 1-2% interest rates that now needs to be refinanced at 4-5% rates. That quadruples the interest cost on that portion of debt. The government has 2 choices: allow interest rates to stay elevated and accept fiscal crisis as debt service consumes everything, or force rates lower through financial repression regardless of inflation. They'll choose repression. They have to, which means savers will be systematically forced into negative real returns to fund government operations. Additionally, Social Security's trust fund goes cash flow negative in 2033, just 7 years away. The gap between benefits owed and taxes collected grows every year. They can't cut benefits politically. They can't raise taxes enough mathematically. So they'll inflate the obligations away, paying promised dollars that buy far less than today's dollars. Based on these realities, here's what you need to do this week, not next month. First, open a Treasury Direct account and move 20-25% of your portfolio into short-term treasury bills under 1 year and Series 1 bonds that adjust with inflation. This is your safety allocation. It won't make you rich, but it preserves purchasing power and provides liquidity. Second, allocate 35-40% to businesses with genuine pricing power, not speculative growth stocks, but companies that own essential assets, provide necessary services, and can raise prices when costs rise. Think utilities, healthcare, consumer staples, energy infrastructure. These businesses maintain real margins during inflation. Third, allocate 10-15% to physical precious metals. Actual gold and silver you can hold, not paper claims on gold. This isn't about gold bugs or conspiracy theories. It's about the mathematical reality that gold has maintained purchasing power across every currency devaluation in history. When Nixon closed the gold window in 1971, gold was $35 per ounce. By 1980, it was $850, a 24x return while bonds lost purchasing power. Fourth, allocate 25-35% to intelligent risks. Real estate investment trusts focused on essential properties, commodity producers, infrastructure assets, and international exposure to currencies likely to appreciate against the dollar. What you absolutely must avoid: stop buying long-term bonds at fixed rates. A 30-year treasury paying 4.5% guarantees you'll lose purchasing power if inflation averages 5%. You're locking in guaranteed losses for 3 decades. Stop holding excess cash beyond 3 to 6 months of expenses. Every day, cash sits earning 0.5%, while inflation runs 6%, costs you 5% in purchasing power annually. Stop waiting for clarity before acting. The market doesn't ring a bell when the transfer begins. You discover it years later when the damage is done. Stop listening to advisors who tell you bonds are safe because they've always been safe. The rules changed when debt exceeded the capacity to repay from productivity. What worked from 1982-2020 during the long-term debt cycle's expansion phase doesn't work during the resolution phase we're entering now. The implementation needs to be systematic but urgent. Week 1, open Treasury direct and brokerage accounts if you don't have them. Week 2-3, move 20% of bond holdings into short-term Treasuries and I-bonds. Week 4-6, shift another 25% from bonds into dividend-focused stock indexes, emphasizing pricing power and international diversification. Week 7-12, add real assets, precious metals, REITs, commodities, using dollar-cost averaging to reduce timing risk. Week 13-24, establish your target allocation and set up automatic rebalancing quarterly. This 6-month systematic approach prevents panic decisions while ensuring you're repositioned before the next crisis accelerates the transfer. The biggest mistake I see is people understanding these principles intellectually, but failing to act until markets force them. They wait for the perfect entry point. They want confirmation from mainstream sources. They seek comfort from their advisors. And by the time everyone agrees the transfer is happening, it's already 70% complete. Let me be direct about something most financial commentators won't tell you. Your financial advisor probably won't recommend this allocation. Why? Because they're compensated based on assets under management using traditional allocation models, evaluated quarterly against standard benchmarks that assume the post-1982 paradigm continues. Recommending a defensive, inflation-resistant portfolio that might underperform temporarily makes them look wrong even when it's right strategically. They optimized for career preservation, not your purchasing power protection. That's not malice, it's incentives. When you understand incentives, you understand behavior. The advisors who correctly position clients for the 1970s inflation are the same advisors who were fired in 1974-1975 for underperforming bonds, only to be proven right by 1980 when their clients had preserved wealth and bondholders had lost purchasing power. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And right now it's rhyming with the 1970s more than any period since. Here's what's happening behind the curtain that confirms this analysis. Central banks globally have been net buyers of gold for 15 consecutive quarters. purchasing over 1,000 tons annually, the highest accumulation rate since the 1970s when they were last preparing for currency devaluation. The People's Bank of China alone has added to reserves for 18 straight months. They're not doing this for investment returns. They're doing this because they understand their own dollar holdings are being systematically devalued. Sovereign wealth funds have reduced dollar-denominated bond allocations by 12% since 2022, while increasing real asset positions. Norway's government pension fund, Singapore's GIC, and Abu Dhabi Investment Authority have all publicly disclosed shifting toward inflation-resistant assets. The world's largest pension funds, CalPERS, Ontario Teachers, Dutch ABP, are restructuring away from traditional 60-40 models toward alternatives, infrastructure, and real assets, explicitly citing concerns about financial repression. These institutions manage trillions in aggregate. They employ the best analysts money can buy. They have access to central bankers and policymakers. And they're all moving in the same direction, away from traditional fixed income and toward inflation protection. Your choice right now is simple but not easy. Continue following conventional allocation advice designed for an environment that ended in 2020, watching your purchasing power erode while your statements show numbers that look fine, or reposition based on where we actually are in the debt cycle, accepting volatility in exchange for purchasing power protection. The comfortable choice is staying put. The prudent choice is adapting to reality. I can't make that decision for you, but I can tell you what the math says with certainty. Debt to GDP at 144%, with mandatory spending exceeding revenue, interest costs exceeding defense spending, and productivity growth at 4% versus required 3% means inflation is the only politically feasible resolution. The transfer from savers to borrowers, from bondholders to asset owners, from cash to real value is not a possibility. It's a mathematical certainty already in progress. This channel exists to cut through the noise and speak truth about cycle positioning, not to sell you products, not to make predictions about tomorrow's market moves, but to help you understand the long-term forces that determine whether your retirement works or fails. If this analysis makes sense, if it helps you see your portfolio differently, if it gives you frameworks for understanding what's actually happening beneath the surface noise, subscribe. We'll keep examining these patterns, updating observations as circumstances evolve, and translating complex cycle dynamics into clear action steps. Turn off this video. Open your portfolio statement. Look at your bond allocation. Calculate what 6% annual inflation does to that purchasing power over 5 years. Then decide if you're positioned for the world we have or the world we wish we had. Make that decision today, not when everyone else realizes the same thing. The machine is breaking, the cycle is resolving, the transfer is happening. Position accordingly. Incognito chats aren't saved to history or used to train models.